Hi folks, welcome to Special Interests with Bob and Donna. Hope you're having a good day. We are going to be continuing with Bob's books. The one we're talking about today is not a serial killer novel. It is something different and it has to do with the courts, etc., and domestic violence. But I'm going to let Bob begin. I'm going to go behind the camera and then I'll be back.
Okay, Donna. Okay, as Donna just mentioned, well, this is my last novel in a collection of 9 books, my canon of works, if you will. And I'll place this here. We're not going to spend, I don't think we're going to spend a lot of time on this book, and there's a reason which I'll unfold in a moment. The name of the book is Battered, and it is pretty much a true story. It is a true story, but I had to present this as fiction. If you remember on the last segment, the third phase that we did on my novels, I went to Andrew Smith, sat next to Andrew Smith on that Robert Shulman serial killer trial, and I wrote a novel called Trace Evidence. And I asked Andrew Smith, Newsday, staff writer, should I write the novel as fiction or nonfiction? And if you remember, he had told me without hesitation, no, it has to be fiction, and I explained the reasons why. Well, when I started writing this book, I was in correspondence with a woman sitting in prison with a 30-year conviction charge. She was sentenced to 30 years for, no question about it, shooting her husband. And it was understood, and I was thrilled because I was finally going to write a book on a topic that was not a serial killer thriller, but it was a true story based on this woman who shot her husband. And that was our understanding from the beginning. And I'll explain, I'll be jumping back and forth here a little bit so you have a picture of how this unfolded. I do a lot of outdoorsy pieces. I've written well over 300 articles on fishing, hunting, all sorts, mostly fishing. And one of the publications that I wrote for was called Big Game Fishing Journal. And the editor of that publication, owner-editor, got a hold of me and he said, Bob, I'd like you to write her story, this woman who shot her husband. I was kind of busy at the time, but then I got pretty much caught up, and I said that I'll contact her in prison and feel it out, and we'll go from there. And that's what I did. And we had this agreement that I would do her story and that it would be nonfiction. Well, I think it was probably 3/4 of the way through, she changed her mind. She no longer wanted the book to be, her story to be written as fact, as the truth, as nonfiction. She wanted me to write it as fiction. And part of the reason was that she thought she would be, I don't want to give away locations. You'll say I changed name. I'm not using her name in the book. But I was understandably upset because I'm going to have to do a major rewrite here. But I said I'm going to go along with this. So then, after she was released, and Don and I, we met on the day that she got out of prison. We met with several people. I'll get into that in a moment. And she thought she'd be not be able to go, let's say, south when she got out. But then she finds out that she could go back home where she grew up. And that's part of the reason that she didn't want the story told as nonfiction. Shortly after she's released from prison, she contacts me and tells me she doesn't want the book published at all. And I was floored. I was nonplussed. And I said to her, call her Caitlin, as I call her in the book here, Caitlin Fitzgerald. I says, Caitlin, you can't unring a bell. The book is published. It's out there. And she was upset about that because she's now home. But, you know, I used a different name. I changed the location. So if she wanted to, you know, that all disguised, that, you know. Anyhow, this fellow who, the editor-publisher of Big Game Fishing Journal, Len Belcaro, when he initially told me to, and by the way, Len Belcaro was a police officer early on. He said, this woman is, what is, help me out here, Donna, to her daughter, to Len's godmother, thank you. Godmother to one of Len Belcaro's daughters. He said, Bob, do you think I would have her in my house? And this is where she stayed while trial was going on before she was sentenced. So do you think I would have this woman in my house with my wife and I believe 2 daughters if I felt that she was a threat in any way, shape, or form? She's been really railroaded. And I don't want to give too much away, but Len Belcaro hooked her up with the consummate attorney in the area. And everything was going smoothly until a girlfriend of Caitlin's got a hold of her and said, how much are you paying your attorney to handle this matter? And that's pretty much how that unfolded. Long story short, she fired her attorney because she was going to get this bargain, if you will. Oh, I know, the fellow said, the attorney said, I know all about your case. I'm going to take the case at a fraction of the cost of blah, blah, blah. So she fired him. And I'll tell you up front, Don and I have had a very good understanding of how the courts work, how law enforcement works, how it works, and how it fails. And I just want to digress from a moment and go into, let's see, go back to knots in my 4-book series. And this is someone, an attorney, who gave me a nice compliment here. And I'm going to read this, and I just want to give you his credentials here. Robert Banfelder's new novel, Knots, third in the Justin Barnes series, is a thriller that takes you away to a different place, like a good thriller should. His research is impeccable, especially the details on tying knots, a special talent of the evil protagonist. His knowledge of police procedures and protocols show that he did his homework. He weaves multiple plots and subplots as expertly as the killer ties knots and delivers shocks along the way to a startling conclusion. Reading this book is like watching back-to-back episodes of The Best of Criminal Minds and CSI without the commercials. Banfelder gives his quasi-detective protagonist, Justin Barnes, a semi-official position that frees up the character to do things you wouldn't expect of a typical detective. Just when you think you have figured out where the plot is going, Banfelder pulls the rug from underneath you with heart-pounding effect. When you read this book, you should set aside plenty of time. Banfelder has the novelist's talent of pulling you from the end of one chapter to the beginning of the next. If you enjoy a great crime thriller, this book will not disappoint you. Highly recommended. Russell F. Moran, attorney, retired now, but attorney here on Long Island. And what I want to posit here is that the man knows his way around the block. He has written a fabulous book titled Justice in America, How It Works and How It Fails. And that's pretty much what you're going to see if you do purchase this book and learn about Caitlin Fitzgerald's plight and how she was railroaded by the police. And Don and I, through many years, we have seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we know of very good detectives. We know of some very, very bad detectives. I even wrote a piece about a detective who, and I had to be careful, allegedly, purportedly murdered his mistress. And I wasn't the only one to write about this. A Newsday reporter touched on this subject. It's just unbelievable what we have experienced. Again, we have seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. We know fabulous police. We know fabulous detectives. We know some very, very bad people, especially back in Queens. So, this woman, this Caitlin Fitzgerald, she was truly abused by her husband in every way, shape, and forms. Verbal, physical, horrendous story. I mentioned this author's name last time, Patty Ann Bangan, author of New Beginnings. I said it's a must-read. And the reason why I say that is because she wrote a book that she really knew what she was talking about because she was an abused woman. The author is the book, the novel, is action-packed, the characters are driven, and the ferocity of the story will stay with you. Well, I think I mentioned this last time. Patty Ann Bangan has been around the block. Patty Ann Bangan was an abused woman like Caitlin Fitzgerald. So, let's see where we're going to go from here. Chapter 1, I'm just going to mention 3 of the chapter's headings to give you, with a little bit of a description. to give you the flavor here. Book 1, Chapter 1, Pizza Before Policy. The police were more interested in picking up a pizza and going back to headquarters after having received a call from Caitlin Fitzgerald that she was in dire straits. Eventually they got to her. It's interesting to note that one of the police officers was in the fishing club with Len Belcaro. Len Belcaro knows these players inside and out. And we had a pretty good idea, I had a pretty good idea from him how bad this Caitlin Fitzgerald was abused. And the police knew about this, and instead of doing what they were supposed to do, escort her home, they let her go home on her own, where now it gets into a gray area. Her husband comes after her, and she is ready for him. She's not going to take this any longer, and she shoots him and kills him. And the whole thing in the courtroom is in this gray area. Did she shoot him in self-defense, or was this premeditated? She was going to set him up. Well, what I'm about to tell you, to me, is astounding. This lawyer that she hired after firing her initial lawyer really was truly an incompetent. And let me just kind of document that here. Okay. Sorry about that. Page 23 of Battered. Having the benefit of live court TV audio taping, pundits had a field day with William Baxter's opening statements. William Baxter being the attorney for Caitlin Fitzgerald. Virtually all the pundits agreeing that the man's performance fell far short of expectations. Does a defense attorney have to be an eloquent speaker in order to properly defend his or her client? No. What the defense attorney must be is prepared, not only in terms of delivery, but on points of law. By comparison, the prosecutor, Philip Morrow, literally and figuratively stood head and shoulders above William Baxter. The prosecutor was well prepared. The defense attorney was not. The contest between the two lawyers proved to be no contest at all. And let me just give you, I said I would document this here. Oh, and by the way, I had virtually all the CBS, NBC news broadcasts, the taping. I had the court transcript, like I had in that other case that I mentioned to you. This thick. Those courtroom episodes continuously and lucidly displayed the incompetence of Caitlin Fitzgerald's defense attorney. The presiding judge, Judge Hirschfield, and again, these are all names that, protect the innocent, made-up names here. Judge Hirschfield, on more than one occasion, had instructed William Baxter at sidebar and out of earshot of the jury to visit the law library. Imagine this. Visit the law library, he tells Baxter, in lieu of you taking your lunch hour. Okay? This is in the court transcript. Caitlin learned quickly, but too late, that you get what you pay for. Caitlin had initially retained a competent attorney that she quickly dismissed after a girlfriend of hers, blah, 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 which I just explained. I tell people sometimes we're approached and somebody's in a little bit of trouble and we don't know whether, they're guilty, they're innocent, they're telling the truth. But what we advise people, if it's a serious charge, something like a murder case, you don't shop for an inexpensive lawyer. You get the very, very best that money can buy. And I mentioned two consummate attorneys in the other episode that we did, the other phase that we did, Paul Gianelli, Billy Keon. If you're in trouble, you want an attorney of their caliber. Many good attorneys around. I had the, I say, privilege and honor to be in these gentlemen's presence during those 15 months on the Robert Shulman serial killer trial. So, let's see. Where are we going to go from here? I don't want to belabor this. Oh, I told Caitlin Fitzgerald, pseudonym, that I really wouldn't promote this book, and I didn't for years, because I wanted to abide by her decision. But at this point, I said, because it is an important book, and it will educate some women out there who are abused, how to handle the situation. Again, she was convicted, Caitlin Fitzgerald was convicted to a term of 30 years. She served 15 years and was released in March of 2015. That's when Don and I met with her. Moments after her release, we went out for breakfast, a group of us. Len Belcaro was present, Len Belcaro's wives, some of Caitlin Fitzgerald's friends. So, Donna, we're going to jump around a little bit, as I explained earlier. We're going to talk about other cases because I just don't want to keep belaboring this. Again, this is the last book, the 9th book in my non-fiction in my fiction series. And this is, well, I really should read this. I'll read the back jacket. It is important. And I'm quoting her. I'm quoting Caitlin. People ask me if I'm sorry I shot Jimmy. I am not sorry, and I tell them that. Jim did so many bad things to me. Inmate, blah, blah, blah. I put her in Bedford Hills Correctional Facility. This work of fiction is an amalgamation of composite sketches concerning battered women whom I have interviewed at considerable length over the course of many years. Its fusion was additionally inspired by one battered woman's jury trial and her subsequent imprisonment for the shooting death of her husband. The courtroom scenes are virtually verbatim, back and forth, bi-monthly. I mentioned this correspondence with one female inmate over the course of several years is closely transcribed as written. That is, the inmates' misspellings, grammar issues, etc., albeit instances of Caitlin Fitzgerald's syntax have been altered for the sake of clarity. There are points that, what is she saying? Also, all other names and locations were changed for obvious reasons. Again, this is a factual account framed in fiction. Be prepared to enter a dark world of spousal violence, murder, courtroom drama, a prisoner's life behind bars, or more specifically, a female prisoner's life behind bars, and Caitlin's eventual freedom. Embellishment is employed in the final chapter and epilogue solely as a tool to sensationalize and carry the story to its conclusion. Otherwise, this narrative is as real as it gets. Donna, come on over here, sit with me. Let's talk about some other cases that deal with the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Oh, the bad and the ugly.
Okay, I'm doing a lot of yakking here. You know this inside out. Let's talk about Richard Schilling, and we are using his name. And let's...
Well, this is way back when. Richard, this was when you were teaching at college, so we're talking about the 80s, I believe, or early 90s. And Richard was accused of molesting a young lady who happened to be the daughter of a high-ranking detective, if I remember correctly. Mm-hmm. And it was an impossibility when you come right down to it, because Richard was nowhere near where this young lady was. And her initial description of the suspect was nowhere near what Richard looked like, because Richard was a big guy. He was like over 6 feet tall.
6'2", and the initial description that the alleged victim said was 5'8". 5'7", something like that. She went 180 after the detective got a hold of her and said, "Well, don't you really, don't?" And the father of this person, I think they wanted a warm body, is what I think. They just wanted someone. It's just unbelievable to me. And this is all.
Yeah, you may be asking, well, how did they pick on Richard Schilling? He was involved in some kind of
bagman. He was
a bagman in some kind of a
counterfeiting scheme.
A scheme.
So he wasn't Lily White, but he did not.
He wasn't a molester.
He wasn't
by any chance.
A molester. As a matter of fact, he had how many people testify for him that he was at a different? It couldn't have been.
Well, he was with a bunch of friends that night. I think he was celebrating a birthday or something.
Okay, and there's the key word, friends. Okay, so friends, maybe they'll lie for you. The problem was that his friends, because they thought this was a slam dunk. We all know that Richard didn't do this. This is an in and out thing, so their behavior buried Richard Schilling.
They got a little cocky.
They were a little bit crazy on a stand, and so the jurors are saying, "Oh, well, these guys are nuts," and they're lying for his friend. That's really what it boiled down to.
So at the time, Bob was writing for Towers News, and he would write up some things regarding the criminal justice system, and.
Let me just say the Towers News, because people aren't going to know this. I jokingly referred to this as the prestigious rag. This paper reached the judges, lawyers, Indian chiefs, if you will,
in Queens, New York,
in a fancy Dan complex, and. So it was an important paper in that sense. Anybody in law enforcement or in that arena read this paper. And I wrote 9 extensive, that's funny now, I did 9 novels. I wrote 9 extensive editorials on Richard Schilling's innocence.
Yes, and the family got wind of it.
Tell them who we worked with. Okay, it's not just Bob Banfelder. How did this go
We
down?
worked with, he worked with Barry Slotnick and Mark Baker, who was working with in Barry Slotnick's office.
Barry
And
Slotnick,
Barry-
renowned
Barry
Manhattan attorney.
Slotnick took the case pro bono because he saw that Richard was totally innocent and railroaded. But how the family discovered Robert, you received a note in your mailbox at the college
Yeah.
saying you've
My
got to-
son's innocent, along with tapes.
And so it evolved from there. But Richard was convicted of the crime, and I believe sent to
Dannemora, up on New York-Canadian border. Not a pleasant place. Dannemora
And the
is...
family was indefatigable, as was Barry Slotnick and Mark Baker and Bob, in trying to get this young man out of prison. Unfortunately...
How about the head of the paper? Geraldine Hammerman.
Geraldine Towers. She has changed her name to Geraldine Towers. She was the editor of Towers News, and she also was a champion with regard to
Yes, she was.
helping Richard get out of prison. So ultimately, the decision was overturned. Richard was released from prison, and unfortunately, maybe about, I want to say within a year of Richard's release, Bob gets a phone call from Richard's father saying that, something bad is happening, and without any kind of elaboration. Well, it turns out that Richard contracted a form of cancer and died shortly thereafter. And I believe he was 26 years old. So it's a very, very sad story.
And I incorporate that, a good chunk of that story, I incorporate that into one of my novels too.
Yes,
I didn't really touch on that, but it's a surprise ending there.
So we've had experience with bad things happening with the police and with the courts, and nothing. You can't take anything for face value that everybody's going to do the right thing by you. You really, really, really have to be aware of what's going on.
This would be a good juncture to talk about. We were called for jury duty, town hall on a DWI case. You want to relate some of that?
We were
and tell them how I stepped out of this.
Interestingly enough, we were both called to jury duty in town. But I, by the way, enjoy jury duty. I have no problem serving at all. I find it very interesting. The first case I was on was in Queens, and it was a drug case, and it was we were even sequestered, which was a whole other thing. That's an experience. But so we go, and of course the defense attorney and the prosecuting attorney, they ask you questions, and you answer them as you see fit. And they didn't have a problem with me. And then they call Bob up, so I'm accepted, and I'm sitting there, and they call Bob up, and they ask the questions, and, can you actually judge beyond a reasonable doubt?
Beyond a reasonable doubt.
Well,
I have
Bob,
a big problem with that phrase.
You have a big problem with that phrase. So Bob is explaining his problem.
What is so reasonable about doubt to begin with?
So then
Not to be cute.
Then the judge decides he's going to read a section of the description of what the juror's responsibility is, and Bob is still coming back with, well, we've seen the good and the bad and the ugly and yada yada yada. Well, lo and behold, he wasn't accepted as a juror on the case. He probably would have tied up the decision the way it turned out for this.
And that's what I'd like to get into. I had mentioned last time I'd like to really have a group here, and we'll talk about. We have the mail person here. I hope the note is on the door. No interruptions. Okay, we're videotaping. Anyhow, I'd like to talk about the death penalty, my feelings on it, Donna's feelings on it, and some very serious suggestions on how we could revamp. So, pretty presumptuous, right? We're going to have some interesting people here discussing that with us. So, anything else you want to add?
Yes, I do. I mean,
Okay.
since
Can't shut you up,
as
huh?
a woman, no, you cannot shut me up. As a woman, I just want to share. There are males, and there are most of the times it's a female that is abused, but there are males that are abused, and there is help. And a lot of times, women especially are embarrassed by the whole situation, and they don't seek help. There is a national hotline, and I'll give the telephone number to you, and it'll be on the screen for you. It's the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. And these people are professionals, and they're there to help. So if you find yourself in a situation where you are being abused by your spouse or your boyfriend or your girlfriend, there is help out there. Okay?
Okay.
And what we'll also do is give you the link for Battered, as well as Bob's other books. And I'm always proud to tell you that he is an award-winning author, because he does a lot of research, and his books are thrilling. They're called thrillers, but they are thrilling. But we will be getting into his nonfiction on fishing and hunting, because he is somewhat of an expert.
This is going to be quite a shift in gears here.
And that's why we named our show Special Interests with Bob and Donna. It couldn't be one specific thing. But as a member of the New York State Outdoor Writers Association and the Outdoor Writers Association of America, he is well respected in that arena, in the outdoors arena.
Just to mention once again, we're going to go from fiction to nonfiction. This book in order actually comes next, but we're going to save this book for last, because when I get done with my fiction and my nonfiction, I'd like to turn some of you on to writing. There's a story or two in all of us, and if you enjoy writing, if you'd like to write, if you'd like to learn how to write, if you don't have the skills, this is the book that you want.
It's called The Essential Guide to Writing Well and Getting Published, and there is a bonus feature, Making Decent Dollars Writing, plus little known reward reaping benefits. That's a tongue thing. Yeah, twist tongue. Okay, so if you like the video, give us a thumbs up again and subscribe to our channel, and you'll be notified when we have other interesting things going on.
The next book will be the fishing smart Anywhere Handbook for Saltwater and Freshwater. We'll be getting into that. And it just won't be Bob Banfelder and his books. We do farmers, we do singers, we do it all. Who else do many?
A lot of stuff. Life is interesting, folks, so we like to get into
many different topics. At least
we've got a lot to do before we leave this earth.
Yes.
Thank you for watching,
Thank you.
folks. Have a great day.